What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Xibalba dev stream. Totally didn't forget about my camera. Promise. Pinky promise. We're here. Despite what the intro to that stream may have seen, I am in fact standing here before you. Before the Keltar tech map, which has received some updates. Shocker between the previous stream and now. We'll go over those updates momentarily. First, I should mention that there was a demo released. If you are an audience accessor on the Discord server, you already probably know that because it was released on the Discord server for you guys to check out. It features some pretty nice things like the first draft of our pathfinding algorithm, the updated fog of war that that Veek has put together. Of course, there's still some things to work out about how it's going to recede exactly, but it's there, and the pathfinding is there, and in general, you get to walk around and units train from the structures and all of this other stuff. Now, we don't have rally points, we don't have unit pathfinding, but for the most part, they will try to pathfind around structures, as you can see here, where previously they didn't, they just spun, and sometimes they will continue to spin, specifically the large units, I believe, and we will, of course, fix those as time goes on, but pretty good stuff overall. We got this lovely conga line, which I'm apparently allergic to, and that will be it for our little update there. We do also have all units and most buildings added to the game from a graphical standpoint. Now, obviously, that is not worth all that much without all of the abilities and everything actually set up properly to support them visually, or support them beyond the visuals. Certain things like units with multiple weapons aren't handled yet, and a bunch of other things. But shout out to Veek for doing a bunch of work anyway. And I believe he stayed up so late that he's actually already asleep, which is pretty funny because this isn't even my latest stream. But maybe he'll turn around. Maybe he'll wake up from a nap or something. You never know. Either way, the Keltar development is going to continue. So I can talk a little bit about what we've been doing and what the Keltar have that's new. Oh, what's up, Veek? You are awake. I did not see brush sizes. I guess I'll check those out. This is not in the demo that is publicly available on our Discord server. But I can check them out. There's brush width and brush height. Ooh. Hello, mama. I can now do stuff like this. I'll eventually get there, guys. Don't worry. I swear I know what I'm doing. Yeah, cool. That's very nice. Obviously, we'll need to we gotta clean up some stuff about the implementation and the menu in particular, but that's very nice. Yes. Veek also did brush sizes earlier today. An epic man. And now, back to the Keltar. So, like I was saying earlier, we can take a look at the Keltar. We can take a look at what we've actually got here and what the things I have changed are. So you'll actually notice that I forgot to change the icon for that one down there. But I've got a new mechanic to share with you guys. And it's a present on the atrium itself, believe it or not. So we have the Ash Ritual and the Bone Trophies. Those have not received any changes as far as the conceptual stuff that we put together the previous stream. This new thing, though, Trophy Rooms, this is a change. This structure can construct assorted trophy rooms as add-ons. Trophy rooms grant bonuses to all subsequently trained units. So, this made me think about overlays and readability, because obviously we're going to need certain effects for reading what the changes actually are. For example, what we have from the Stone Room is the first one that I came up with. It's very simple. Units trained get +2 armor. Pretty useful. But you have to add on to each individual structure, right? The Armory gives +4 armor penetration. Also fairly simple. You can see the utility in it. Obviously, I haven't done the stats yet or anything. I was panickedly putting that together before the stream actually started, while the stream was starting. while it was on the starting soon thing. So I can go and grab some stuff for that now. But the core idea was, of course, to get the initial concept for all of these aspects taken care of so that we can take a look at some of the other trophy rooms we might do. Now, a key thing is that these trophy rooms are in the infrastructure section because they can be built by any of these production facilities in any branch. Originally, I was thinking that I would make unique ones for each branch, but I feel like it would be kind of annoying to come up with concepts. For one, from a conceptual standpoint, it's really difficult to come up with concepts that work for everything, right? That's kind of challenging. If you wanted to write like a concept that would only be for Bloodline, maybe you would want to use something very similar to that concept, like bonus armor or movement speed or armor pen or attack speed or whatever, energy generation, shield generation, whatever the case may be. If you wanted to do something like that, it would be, you would have quite the tall order on your hands. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Also, the other question about throwing in add-ons for these structures. Right now, it says that they're built from the structures themselves. I think I will have them built by workers instead, and they will attach to any structure within a certain. They'll attach to one structure within a certain radius. So, I'm thinking of also making these stackable, actually, now that I think about that idea. The concept of being able to build multiple stone rooms to give +4 armor, right? Or 2 armor per stone room. That could be kind of interesting, actually. Obviously, the build size of these is yet to be determined, but I imagine that you would have to think very carefully about your layout if you wanted to do something like this. Obviously, there are things you can do like taking an add-on or taking a structure and like moving it with a transport. You can do that if you want to rearrange your base, but it will require a little bit of micromanagement, and it'll also require a certain amount of actual assembly. So I don't know about 6 weight, but 12 capacity. That's a bit weird. Don't know about that one. But yeah, so there's just some thoughts, I guess. Okay. Now we can go to the arena and remove the room. I'll probably change it from armory to something else. Oh boy. There you go. That's my response. I should actually move the ripcord thing to the other monitor so I don't get distracted by it. So, speaking of distractions, we actually are in a situation where I'm going to go off on another sort of tangent. I wanted to document something to do with the if we go to stuff like, let's see, I guess it would be under mechanics, wouldn't it? Xibalba mechanics. So here we can say, actually, I guess we could probably do this under buffs and debuffs now that I think about it. Because I changed the vault, because the vault changed directories, all of my things that I added to the dictionary got reset, which is pretty good. What's up, Knight of the Realm? I'm about to write some discussions about overlays and readability. Because I came up with something for the Keltar that I thought was a really neat mechanic, but it's definitely going to mandate that we have overlays to demonstrate or to designate like what's going on with that. So the mechanic is that you can build these substructures, which I'm classing as add-ons currently because they rely on being attached to another structure in order to function. But they're still built from a worker conventionally instead of it being built from a structure. And obviously in Cosmonarchy Retail, you'll be able to move around structures all the time with transports, and there won't be any issues with that the way that there were in the Brood War attempted implementation. Anyway, the basic idea, because I already talked about this earlier, the CliffsNotes version of everything is that you've got these behaviors associated with each trophy room, which is what we're calling these instead of just a generic add-on. So each trophy room provides a unique bonus to all units that are trained after the fact for that unit. And so in this case, it's almost like you could consider it sort of like an upgrade, but obviously if you destroy the add-on, the advantage is alienated for the other units. We don't want this to be something that's literally for all units that are that were ever trained by that structure, or all units in general, like an upgrade normally would be, because it's a lot harder to alienate such an advantage, and it's also a little bit nonsensical. Obviously, it's like, because I blew up a structure, your upgrades don't work anymore. So obviously that doesn't make any sense. But I wanted to give some way to underscore the idea that Keltar are going to be very insignificant in a numbers game sense, but have individually strong units. And I feel like this is a neat little way to allow them to essentially specialize their units or augment, upgrade their units in a way that still requires, I think, a fair push and pull. You've got to account for build space for these things. You've got to actually build them, which takes away from your economy because you're building them with a worker, and they cost a decent amount of resources, and they're easy to snipe, actually. They don't have very heavy vitals. Like, this is 3 armor, which is a fairly standard amount of armor for structures. It's actually on the low end, and this is even less, 2 armor, and both of them only have 400 life. So it's actually quite easy to sort of bang these up. With that being said, obviously it's going to require a bit of a numbers game approach to figure out like how to actually implement them so that they're satisfying to use, but not unfair to fight against. And one of the ways that I wanted to do that in terms of providing you with a way to interface with the mechanic, or at least understand what's going on with the mechanic, is obviously I wanted to talk about visualization for the mechanic. And that made me think of overlays. And then while I was thinking about overlays, I was thinking about what can we do about, regarding overlays to make it so that it's somewhat scalable. Because I feel like when it comes to small units, like say the scale of a Maverick or a Marine in Brood War, or Maverick in Cosmonarchy Brood War, obviously if you have a ton of buffs on a unit and they're all visualized with an overlay, that's going to look really weird and unreadable. I still think it would be better to show all of those overlays from the perspective of like, you're at least showing that there is a lot of effects. Like the fact that it's unreadable is at least still an indication that there's a ton of effects on this unit, buffs and debuffs. So at least you get that. But it's not as big of a deal for units that are very easy to destroy, which smaller units visually tend to be. So if you can just snipe that unit, then like it's like distracting because there's like 10 effects on it. If I kill the unit, which is very easy to do in that sense, it's a lot easier to just get rid of the issue, right? Because the issue solves itself almost because the unit dies much quicker than other units do. So also, we would want subtler mechanics or subtler overlays overall compared to other RTS games, compared to Brood War even, where they're still noticeable, but like maybe ones that only occur on death are like the Lazarus Agent from the Apostle in Cosmonarchy Brood War. An idea that I had would be that they would occasionally glow green for a fraction of a second during their animation. So you'd get like a green highlight, almost like the High Templar highlight when they're the trail that they have. You'd get like a green version of that almost for every one of the units that would be affected by it. And so you'd get that just for a split second, like a subtle shader effect. And every now and then that would happen, and that would indicate that there's an effect, but it's not like if it was pulsing faster and it was happening every, basically all the time, that would indicate that it's more important, right? So the frequency with which it's pulsing is also an indication for like how pressing it actually is. Whereas if it's something that only happens on death, you don't need to visualize that all the time. That's information that actually there's even a read for when they actually pop. So in this context, you don't actually need to worry about it to the same degree, right? So I think that there's a lot there to unpack, but I still feel like we have a pretty good idea of like a barometer for like how to handle that, right? Now, the reason why I'm also thinking about overlays regarding sizes of units is that this issue of overloading a unit with too many overlays, too many effects visually, and getting into a messy readability nonsense, it definitely occurs with large units too, in Cosmonarchy Brood War, in just regular Brood War, because those large units have the same spot for each overlay, each effect. So I would propose that overlays, them spell effects like ability effects or passives or whatever the overlay type is, it will have a location to attach to. So this could be like front or weapon or origin, self, whatever. Whatever the attachment point is, that's where it would go. And by default, if there's no attachment points defined for a specific sprite, like coordinates or whatever, then you would simply attach to like 0, 0 on the graphic, right? Or the center of the graphic, I guess I should say. And so that would be like the Brood War approach. You just attach to the center of the graphic. And then obviously if there's, a specific thing that's supposed to attach to the center of the graphic deliberately, like maybe you just leave it blank deliberately then. But if you wanted to attach like the armor pen overlay for the Keltar trophy room, you would then give them like a weapon attachment specifically. Like the buff would be maybe a sort of bright light flashing or pulsing or something like that, somewhat frequently, or like maybe a ghostly like glow on it or whatever the case may be, something to indicate what it is, and hopefully not something very generic, you could say. And it would attach specifically to the weapon. Now, this does add a little bit of overhead for every unit that you add, where if you actually want that to look proper, you would need to define coordinate points for every single thing. But I'm totally open to doing that myself. I don't really see that there's a huge issue there. And I think we'll be able to develop tools that will make it easy to do that menial work over and over again. And obviously, the other idea is that, like, you only have to do this for, like, the weapon and maybe, like, the feet or something, if you wanted the feet, or the base of it, I guess you could say, because not every unit has feet. You could do something like head or obviously front or something like that. And basically we would have like armor buffs would probably be attached to the, what would you call it? They would probably be attached to something like the center of the unit, because that's like the whole body. But maybe there's like a specific area that's obviously a consolidation of the armor, like the unit that walks around with a literal shield. Like in that case, the armor would probably be an armor buff would be attached to that instead. So you can start to see how I'm thinking about approaching this, where it becomes a lot cleaner and actually it communicates more information while also avoiding readability issues if overlays have dedicated attachment points. If you see a unit who's holding a rifle or an axe or a sword, or it's got a big cannon because it's a walker or whatever the case may be, and it's got a ton of fucking stuff, but specifically a ton of fucking stuff on the weapon, then oh, that unit has a lot of enchantments about the weapon. Like, I've got to watch out for that unit. That unit's going to be pretty tough. And so hopefully this sort of helps to communicate the visual language of the game in a better way than just slapping a bunch of overlays on a unit and hoping for the best, especially for larger units where that could just sort of immediately fall apart into an ocean of things. In this case, I would imagine a situation for if you have a Phobos from Cosmonarchy Brood War, if you have that kind of a graphic, that level of scale, or much larger, as some of the graphics will eventually be, you can imagine a situation where you would actually define like maybe as many as 10 different body parts for the attachment points, like body attachment points. And this body attachment point system would basically alternate. So you would have like, here's an example of like one overlay goes on this one, another overlay goes on the other one, and so on and so forth, until all of the body attachment points are full, and then it loops back around and starts stacking them. So that would essentially be how we would iterate over it, I think. So this kind of system, I think, will be quite impactful for cleaning up readability for a lot of enchanted units. Because it's one thing to say, it doesn't really matter if there's 10 overlays on a Maverick, because it's going to die, only has 40 HP, just kill it. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to say, how about all of those overlays are on, a Phobos with like 500 HP and 10 armor. Suddenly it becomes a lot harder to justify, if you know what I mean. So yeah, ultimately, we are still going through the whole rigmarole of figuring that stuff out. But this is something that came up to my mind, and I wanted to talk about it on the stream, document my plans for it, like everything that I just said there, documenting it into a couple of paragraphs here, admittedly in the buffs and debuffs section. That's totally fine. So, yeah, there you go. So we'll say, all buffs and debuffs have visual reads associated with them, commonly referred to as overlays. Overlays for... so overlays have attachment points specified. So we'll say overlays attached to units in... we'll say specified... at specified points called attachment points. Offsets called attachment points. For example, a weapon enhancing buff will attach to a unit's weapon, while an armor reducing, I guess we could say armor hampering debuff will attach to a unit's body or shield, or heavy armor if applicable. So that's basically the attachment point system. We'll also note that overlays are designed to be as visually, so as we'll say as attention grabbing. We'll say overlays that are more attention grabbing than others are presumed to be more impactful, while... how is impactful not a word in this dictionary? While less important effects have more subdued overlays. That's like a general acknowledgement of the visual language. I actually don't think I need to elaborate on anything else. I'm not sure if I missed something from my big fucking TED Talk explanation. That RTS that you posted, Night of the Realm, was a real winner. Jesus. Oh, is it a re-release of something? I didn't look at it too hard, to be completely honest. I see. It's pretty intense. Okay. So now we have this information in the overlay section, or the buffs and debuffs section about overlays. Now we can get back to the good stuff, which is the Keltar updates. So I was thinking about like some basic ideas about what needs to be done. Obviously, I've moved a bunch of units down to tier 2 that I felt were too potent or otherwise would better fit at tier 2 as opposed to tier 1. So, for example, the Skin Dagger is actually not a unit that was particularly potent, but I decided to up the ante with it, increase its vitals, its cost, its damage, and change up a little bit about its role and stuff. Well, not really its role, but it just the vitals associated with it. And I felt like I was given the freedom to do that by moving it to tier 2, where it felt like maybe it didn't serve a massive role. It had a little bit of role overlap with the Disciple because of the fact that they're both melee units, even though obviously the Skin Dagger is significantly more fast. It can be faster. It is faster, period, and it's even more faster if it's alone. But that element of it, to use it as more of like a harassment-oriented unit or whatever, it feels like it should be dedicated a little bit more to tier 2. I am cognizant of the fact that because of the Ash Ritual, you are looking at some steep costs to get up to tier 2. And I think for that reason, I'll probably need to either reduce the time for each ritual from 10 minutes to 5 minutes per ritual, or I'll need to increase the amount of time, the base time, for the ceremonial progression via kills and deaths. We'll definitely need to feel out what the proper setup is, but I feel like currently there's almost no way that the current math equals out to them being able to actually tech up at a reasonable rate. They would basically need to be fighting a Regency that has a ton of units. Now, again, this does work for upstarts, so maybe there's going to be a ton of upstarts, but I don't think so. I think the upstarts tend to be pretty small in number. It's kind of interesting because you could make it so that if you wanted a map that was like, for some reason, biased towards Keltar, be it a campaign map or an actual skirmish map, like you wanted a skirmish map that has like biases towards some Regencies and against others, because, imbalanced map design in terms of like biasing it in favor of one of the races, that's been a long time aspect and component of Kespa's balancing. So maybe we would do something similar to this. I haven't thought too much about that, but obviously I'm going to have asymmetrical maps at the very least, which I think naturally is going to lead to some biases, even if they're not intentional. But if you wanted to intentionally gear something towards that, you could actually you could specify that the upstarts could be Rosellium or Lethray, Rune in the future. Some of these regencies that have a large number of units, because then the Keltar could sort of like harvest them as a resource, which is kind of interesting. Even so, I don't imagine, like, maybe there's something in between 10 minutes and 5 minutes as the base time that would allow us to sort of speed that process up, like something in between that can be a happy medium, you could say. But we'll have to think about that a little bit later. Also, shout out to DF for yesterday processing the creep graphic, the creep edges, so that we actually have something of a guide to look at. Like, holy shit. The creep edge graphics, I'll actually open this up just as a bit of a side tangent. Because I just think it's so insane to me. This is it. I might not even be able to show this reasonably on stream. Here we go. We'll zoom in. So this is how Blizzard decided to organize their shit. I don't actually know if this has been rearranged by DF or not. Probably has, for the sake of sorting it. But look, this is their idea of creep. This mess. Now, DF sorted it and labeled it, but this was just in a file. Sometimes not even as neatly as this, where it was like sometimes there were 2 or 3 of these things in the to the right or whatever the like. Why? Why have they done this? So yeah, it's just absurd. I'm really glad that DF went through the trouble of doing that for us. Holy shit, insane. So Night of the Realm asks, could you have multiple upstart factions on the map, not coexisting, but each occupying their own corner of the map? Yeah, I mean, in some cases they might even coexist. In some cases they might fight each other. But especially for skirmish, you could have like one upstart in one area and one upstart in another. I would think for competitive play, you'd probably want to keep the upstart symmetrical in terms of which upstart it actually is. But if you're going to go with asymmetric maps, as I intend to, you are throwing a lot of like the idea of symmetry or whatever out in that capacity. Basically, the conceit behind throwing out symmetrical maps for skirmish, the main idea is that you are not meant to be able to do the same strategy. I don't even think this is feasible in the first place because there's so many nuances about RTS that even attacking from a different angle is going to have a different result. Even if you say, oh, it shouldn't be like that, the game should be designed so that that doesn't happen. But like, it's just a fact of the matter. Like, pathfinding nodes or whatever the case may be, flow fields and stuff. Like, there's so many different things that can happen, especially in Brood War, but probably in our game too, that it would be unrealistic to try to sort of shape in such a way that, oh yeah, if you attack from the north and the south, in all of the complex different geometry that can exist in an RTS, that the same thing will happen no matter which angle you take. Like, it's just not realistic, right? So there's so many nuances there. I don't think it's even possible to say that you can do the same exact thing no matter which spawn you have or which place you are on a map, as long as it's perfectly symmetrical. Now, broadly speaking, if you take away from like the super, like maybe hair splitting aspect of like, can you do literally everything the same? Some people will argue that you should be able to execute on the same strategy no matter which spawn you are. But even that's not true, because if you have spawns where it's like, say you're in a situation where it's a 3-player map with rotational symmetry, and that's how you get across, like it's a 1v1, but on a 3-player map. If your opponent is to the south as opposed to the west, and you're in the north or the northeast or whatever, that has ramifications on, what you can actually do, right? So my thinking is asymmetric maps are going to be the way to go, just because they throw away all this stuff. They throw away the concept of like, basically they throw away the concept of you can do the same thing over and over again, no matter what your spawn is. Like, that's why we're giving people the opportunity to select their spawn. Now I think it'll be something like, at least in the context of a pro game, I would imagine there'd be like a coin flip or something like that to determine who picks first, who picks their spawn first. I'm not 100% sure how you would do this, but I imagine, because I'm thinking that the pro games would all be at least best of 3, where like the first player, the player who picked the map gets to pick second, and the player who picked the second map gets to pick first. Or you get the idea. So whoever picked the map doesn't pick first, because they already get the advantage, quote unquote, of picking the map themselves. And so this is sort of like in CSGO, where a pro team will pick a map, and the other team will get to pick which side they start. So a pro team will pick, say, nuke, and the other team will start CT side, because CT side's favored on nuke generally, broadly speaking. So that could be like one example, right? So you basically have something like that, where you get to pick the spot that you're at. That would be pretty cool. And then I guess it would be a coin flip to decide the last one, or it would be in CSGO they have knife rounds, which is kind of goofy. I don't know what we would do. It would probably just be a coin flip, which really just means a random number generator would figure it out. But who knows? Maybe TOs will come up with their own formats and stuff. The point is, I don't know what you would do in skirmish mode to pick who picks first, because I could see that being kind of annoying for somebody who, like, say they get a stroke of bad luck and they don't get picked. They don't get to pick first, because you're signing up for a 1v1 and a best of 1, not a best of 3, if you know what I mean. Or even if it's not a 1v1, I guess it was like a 2v2 or something. I'll think about that later. But yeah, the idea is that you can pick your side. You can pick your spawn. And you're able to see what the map features actually are. So if you're picking your spawn and you get to see like, oh, I'm in a spot where like there's actually a lot of bases nearby, that's obviously going to impact what your first role is. Like maybe you play a more economic game as a result of that. If you're in a spot where there are less bases, there's obviously the opposite of the binary. Okay, well then maybe you should bunker down in one base for a while. Maybe you should rush. Maybe you should get a proxy base somewhere. There's like so many different things you could do. Just doing away with the principle that you should be able to do the same thing every map from every spot in one map from every spot because it's symmetrical. I don't think that that's actually very reasonable. Insofar as I guess I just don't find it very interesting. But beyond the interest or compelling nature of it, whether or not it is or whatever, we're already setting the precedent that players are going to have to test themselves in the context of adaptability pretty frequently. So that's just because like they're playing in a game where even if they decide to focus one regency and never play any other regencies, even if somebody's like, I'm only Keltar, they're still going to be fighting against fucking eventually 19 other regencies, 20 if it's a mirror matchup. So don't think they're going to be able to get away with not adapting. It'll be like that would be like one tricking in League. There would be a certain aura around you. You'd be thought of as a dirty one tricker. So yeah, that'll be fine though. I think it'll work out. But to answer your question about like multiple upstart factions on the map, obviously in campaign context, anything goes. Like I'm totally fine with something like that. The reason why I was a little reticent to say yes in the skirmish context is because of that whole symmetry argument. But since I'm throwing that out anyway with sizes and with or not sizes, but other core aspects of the game, like I actually don't think it's that big of a deal. So yeah. It'll be pretty interesting to see how this stuff takes shape. I am still of the opinion that if you are somebody so if you have a good game, people are going to naturally gravitate towards it and play it. So, I mean, it's hard to measure that because maybe we have a good game, but it doesn't get discovered. Maybe we don't have a good game, but people decide to play it anyway, like just because it's the only RTS with any effort put into it in a while. I don't know. There's a number of different things that could go wrong there. But I like the idea anyway. Like in theory, if we make a banging RTS game, the first of, like, literally the first since Brood War, then it's going to be hard to ignore that. So, yeah. I also think it was a really good idea. I can't remember. I think it was probably somebody in the chat. Honestly, I owe like some of the design decisions in this game actually do come from the chat, believe it or not. So that's pretty impressive. If you're watching this back after the fact, you are missing out on an opportunity to influence this game. Now, maybe it'll come to pass that your influence was actually negative and I have to punch you in the face and then undo the thing that you suggested. But it's still on me because I made the decision to do it. The point is, there's a lot of things a lot of value added from listening to chat, getting a second opinion, a constant check and balance. From the angle of so I don't know who suggested it, but somebody suggested making it so that upstarts were just like small factions of regencies, basically. And since then, the concept has sort of evolved into what I've written now. Although I don't know how much information I've actually put in here. So I said, upstarts are aspirant nations of the various regencies that populate the myriad locales of Xibalba. These generally unaffiliated groups are insignificant on their own, often being logistically outmatched by the superpowers that stretch across the universe. But that doesn't stop these denizens from engaging with their superiors. Upstarts take shape in the form of paramilitaries that threaten the early stages of matches and help to characterize the planets of the local solar system that they inhabit. I think star system is actually more general. Solar refers to soul. I think I should actually change that. I don't remember though. I can't remember which one was more general. I'm pretty sure star system is. When enabled in the lobby's game settings, upstarts begin a mission with a predetermined level of map control as defined by the map's creator. Upstart playstyles can be dictated by mappers, allowing for customizing how aggressive, expansionist, and territorial they act, while also determining how open to negotiation they are. So in skirmish, they won't be open to negotiation whatsoever, I don't think. And then there's like documentation. This actually hasn't changed. I think maybe this was tightened up a little bit, but for the most part, it hasn't changed. The key thing is that they're not like, you're not fighting some fucking monkeys basically anymore. There was the idea that theoretically you could be fighting stuff like, you know, literally like people with like sticks and spears and stuff, like basically great apes. Yeah, star system is probably more generic. I'll just go ahead and quickly fix that up. There you go. And it will be interesting if somebody does do a documentary about Cosmonarchy. I guess they would have plenty of fucking footage to look back on. I don't envy whoever has to dig through that. That's a multi-person job. It's actually a job for no one. Don't do that. What are you doing? If you're a games journalist doing a documentary about Cosmonarchy, stop. At least don't do it this way. Oh yeah, I will be starting that Frauds Club YouTube channel sometime soon as well. It occurred to me I should probably start it with actual content that's related to what we are or what we're doing. But beyond needing a trailer, a sort of a channel trailer, which I imagine won't really be that in depth yet, because we just don't have that much to show yet. I think the core idea behind the channel is initially going to just be more formal conversations about the industry standards and stuff. So I want to have like interviews with game developers. Like I talked about that briefly on the Discord server. Yeah, exactly. Every monster too. I want to do stuff like that. I would like to also talk with some people who aren't in the games industry anymore. There's a few people who used to work within games and are like, you know, high-level programmers or whatever. If I can get their attention and get them to agree to sit down for a video interview, that would be pretty useful, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. Stay tuned about that, I suppose. That's all I got for you. It'll be pretty nice to get some more voices out there or whatever. It'll basically be like, I thought of it, and it's just a natural way for me to leverage the skills I gained practicing being an interviewer. You know, doing the interviews on the Semi Pronogo channel about CS:GO and stuff. Being able to do those, take those, and then like try to get good quality interviews out of talking with people about video games, about game design, about programming, about software. All these things. So whenever I get a chance to sit down with Jonathan Blow, you could expect some, well, there'll be some conversations to blow your mind. That one I know will be pretty good, because he always, even in cases where the interviewer is a complete idiot or just not on their game, if you want to be more nice, he gives a really good interview. Like he usually has to just interview himself basically because the other person isn't doing anything, but he's able to give some insightful answers anyway. And then you just sort of grit your teeth through the questions, and then he starts talking again, and it's fine. So he's almost like if you had to compare that to somebody that I've interviewed in esports, it would be like Thorin always gives a good show no matter what is going on, and hopefully I can help augment him and get him to a position where he can do stuff, set him up for success. But he's gonna do at least some baseline level of high quality work no matter what. That's basically Jonathan Blow as well. It would be really funny to interview Designer Dave, but I don't know if he would. Like, I guess he probably wouldn't vet me too much if I said I wanted to interview Designer Dave. If I said, hey, I want to interview you about your experience, he probably doesn't get that very often, I imagine. No, which isn't like a diss against him or anything. It's just, I imagine most people don't get interview requests too often. Of this kind in particular, where it's like literally video, you know, the video content and stuff. I still can't. This is a complete aside, but at some point I tuned into a Designer Dave stream where he was supposed to be like writing his book or doing something. He's doing something allegedly, but he was just watching a bunch of like it was like a composite shot of like 30 Twitch channels all in one page, and it was all like Black Lives Matter riots and stuff. And he was just watching that like on the stream. Which is actually breaking like a million fucking rules. I guess he was doing it on YouTube. There's probably no law against that or rule against that. But like if he was doing it on Twitch, that would have fucking. You're not supposed to stream other people's streams if you don't know. And he was doing it to like 30 of them. But it's like, why the fuck are you doing this? That's like that's a moment. That's a rare moment, is what that is. All right, so let's try to get back on track. It's very hard when you're dealing with Designer Dave. Memories of Designer Dave. I don't know if you saw me reminiscing about that earlier in Out of the Realm, but it was funny when like you were in the chat and he was like, you were the only one basically being a voice to the opposite, like arguing a position that everybody else did not have, and he was like just trying. He was basically dismissing you. He's like talking about like sales figures and stuff, which don't even figure into it. And then I joined like after you had left, and he's like, "Are you the same guy? Are you the same person?" He did upload a monetization video about mobile games, which made me sick to my stomach when I was listening to. So he accomplished that at least. All right, so I'm thinking about some stuff here. I'm thinking about some units. I actually liked the 4-3-3 approach we had for the tier 1 over here. And I feel like it's probably a little lax, a little light on variety, on compositional structure, if you will, without that. But I'm not 100% sure about that because, like, it's not like obviously there's the role overlap between the Skin Dagger and the Disciple. So the question is, we've got short range infantry. We have 2 melee units, one of which is pretty, you could say, close range. One of them is larger, basically. One of them is more utilitarian. And yeah, so the question really is like, do we even want a unit that has higher range than this? I guess that what we could use is a unit that can target air from the bloodline, from the arena. We don't have one of those yet. Even their ranged unit doesn't allow that because it's a shotgunner. Although that might change later, but who knows? Obviously, if you wanted to target air units, you could obviously grab the Edifice. I might make it so that the Overturn can only target ground units because it's like, even from the preview image, you can kind of see, although that's obviously placeholder, that it doesn't really look like something that would angle up. But maybe it'll just be updated later. Who knows? The Despot will probably only attack ground, which does mean we need maybe, well, we don't need, but we could use a Warwing unit that can attack air as well as ground. Maybe it could be an air v air unit that crashes into ground units, sort of like the Aurora in Cosmonic Brood War has that last orders thing. But it sort of combining the Lan effect, aka Corsair, with the Aurora in that context could be kind of interesting. I'm also thinking about a another trophy room here. I don't really know what it'll be called yet. But I'm thinking that the passive can be something like, on death, it would provide some sort of bonus. I guess the banner hand. So the banner hand has the share shields generated thing, and then consume shields when the banner hand dies, which is kind of an interesting mechanic, I think. We could have something where it's like it just adds more shields to nearby units or something. So it would be like adds 10 shields to all allies within X amount of range, something like that. And then I was thinking that if you wanted to have like the suicidal fighter unit or whatever, that could be a nice little synergy where you could build the fighters that crash land, and they would crash land, and then on that would be their death, which would then like any melee units in the area or any units in the area, I guess in general, those ones would benefit from it, right? So it'd be like a natural synergy. But it would probably also just be used for infantry in general. And that's why I'm thinking it probably has to be pretty small. It has to be like 10 shields or something. Armory is also a very generic name, I'm aware, but I will get it done later. Oh, wait. Dude, you can't be waking up at 7:39. I know it's like 6:39 your time instead. But get it together, homie. What's up though? How you doing? I think you'll probably just won't be able to path behind very large cliffs, but we already have plans for occlusion. Which will, I guess I should probably document that at some point. Oh yeah, I didn't do stats for it. Well, I know I did, but I didn't do costs for it. Don't know if plus 10 shields is really all that useful, but considering these can stack, it's a bit different. I actually rediscovered the soundtrack, which introduced me to the word Xibalba in the first place. Which is the... Fuck. Am I a lunatic? Surely that's a word. It's literally a word. Somebody made this. Anyway, yeah, I was as I was saying. Been a while since I updated this one. I should actually go back and note what I've done later. Don't need to do that now, though. So we'll say... so I've already done... This is note overlay in buffs, debuffs section. Already did that. I guess I could do Xibalba stream. Check map. This is what we're still doing, so I'll leave that open. But then I also wanted to do note occlusion for obscured units. And then I don't know what I did here. I know I did. Oh, actually, I can note a bunch of other stuff that I already did, which is CMUW ports, Tier 3 Terran buildings, Tier 3 Protoss buildings, and then this was oh wait, no, maybe I didn't. Yeah, that's right. I didn't do any ports on the 13th. I actually forget what I did related to Xibalba on the 13th. I guess it was another stream, right? So Xibalba stream, Keltar tech map, Keltar tech progression ideas. Trophy room mechanic. Okay, now I think we've got pretty much everything. I probably did some more shit on the 14th, but I'll get to that. Oh yeah, I did. I did Xibalba recording. Sakura campaign planning. And that's that. Okay. Back to what we were actually doing here. So I will correct the typo. So yeah, Roller Skate Man. You might want to check out my Keltar tech map since we got a new mechanic, the trophy room stuff that we covered earlier or mentioned earlier. Oh, I guess I should correct that. That is because it still says that you can construct, which is not really the case. So benefits from attached trophy rooms. We'll say adjacent. Can attach to a single structure and Construction structures. There you go. Now we're talking. Yeah, the rituals thing is it was big to get that done the previous stream. But the trophy rooms thing is new. It's something that I did before I started this stream today. And it's basically just the core concept is like you're building the add-on from the worker. So you have to interfere with your economy by taking a worker away. The build times might go up for them now that I know that they're not attached to the structure. Originally, I made the build times kind of small because it was going to block unit production. But now that I know it's actually a mechanic to, like, that's built from the worker, I can probably increase the build times, actually. But, yeah, beyond that, you know, I'll nudge them a little bit because I think that makes some sense. Find the stone room is the other one. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, I haven't actually added any other units, but I know that I'm going to add at least 2 units. One of them is so first things first, I actually have to go into Despot and remove the air target because that's no longer a thing. And then I guess we should also go into the Despot unit. Where is it? So that's ordered to 2. Oh yeah, I also wanted to go and grab the drum beat. I don't think its weight should be 6. That's a pretty obvious prank to myself. Probably one of the only air units that doesn't cost hypervials. It's kind of interesting to think about. Looking at my unit document, my unit name document. Unfortunately, I don't really think there's anything there for this. Not sure about a unit name for this guy. Yeah. So basically, this is a fighter that is meant to be it's a unit. I guess I could make it something that only targets air units. I'm not really 100% sure about that one, but the idea was that at least it can attack air units, unlike the Despot. But it can attack air units, maybe also ground units, and it crashes into ground units, hostile ground units when it dies, attempts to, which is like the Aurora from Cosmonic Brood War. However, obviously, if you saw the gravestone, you know that the passive for it allows dead units, when they die, to give +10 shields. Obviously, this means that this suicidal unit, when it's on, when it's dying, would crash into a force and thus also heal the, allies in the area, right? Which is kind of interesting in that capacity. So you could imagine a more supportive version, a Windhenge outfitted with a number of gravestones could be interesting, because obviously these things can stack. So you could start popping them and then giving 30 or 40 shields to all allies in a pretty wide region, based on each one of these going down. So you could use them in many respects to keep your army active, sort of like repurposing offensive units for some sort of utility, which I think is kind of neat, because maybe the Keltar don't have like dedicated specialist units in the same way that other regencies do, but they are able to augment existing units into some more utilitarian roles in specific cases. In this case, when they're dying, which is kind of like thematic, I think, for the whole regency's like reason to exist. Raison d'être. You want to speak stupid languages? There probably will be, just because I don't know if you were here, Knight of the Realm, or caught up on this elsewhere. So the plan that I came up with, I think it was 2 streams ago now, so it would have been on the 11th, was that Keltar, they, before technology allowed them to go past these limits, they would die because they would grow too large for their bodies to handle. And sort of like how if you grew too tall, like your heart has to work a lot harder, right? Or if you're just fat, I guess, your heart has to work harder to get to pump the blood everywhere. Well, eventually the rules of like, gravity and stuff dictate that like your bones start to like atrophy or collapse or somehow get like, degraded. A lot of shit goes wrong if you get too large. Well, the Keltar just keep growing, and that would be their way of dying. Instead of old age, it would be literally dying because like they grew too large. And this means that when they were able to separate out the capacity for, like when they were able to say like somehow extend their lifespan by way of increase it, like there are 2 ways that they do this. So the most of the ways that it works is that Keltar get to a desired size and then receive something to stop their growth hormones from continuing to secrete. And then the other way is more of a warlike experimental way, if you will, which is actually going in and, replacing their bones with metal or augmenting them with metal in some way, or, doing other structural things to make it so that they can continue to grow and won't collapse in on themselves in the same way. So using genetics, like gene therapy, bone therapy, all this other stuff. And obviously, like, we can play fast and loose with the rules initially when it comes to like explaining how the science actually works, and we can find other ways to explain like how it justifies. Once we settle on a final implementation, we can sort of work backwards to get an in-universe explanation. I don't think we need to be super specific right out the gate, but that does mean that you'll have these like enormous, Keltar running around or slowly stomping around, plodding around in the late game. Like, tier 7 units that come out of the bloodline section might be very large, or the ironclad section where they're, I guess they would be ironclad in general, wouldn't they? Because ironclad is obviously an allusion to the whole metal bone thing. So as far as them being in flyers, like, I could imagine some hellish experiments, or maybe some more mundane things like dudes in a jet suit or something, or a wingsuit of some sort. I don't fully know how. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how like sensible it would look, but I could imagine it happening. Like, I could imagine Units probably wouldn't come out of the War Wing branch. They'd probably be in the Bloodline. But you know. Oh yeah, the ones where they get the growth hormone blocker thing is just like the default Keltar approach. Like most Keltar just get to a point where they're happy with how big they are, essentially, and then, or maybe it would even be like a customary thing, like you know how like a lot of kids in the West get circumcised, a lot of boys get circumcised. So it might be something like that where it's like, oh yeah, you just do this at a certain age, you know. I guess that's usually at birth, but you get the idea. It's like some people take a driver's test. Some people, um, I don't know. What do you? They buy their car at 25 or whatever. I don't think you can buy your own car until some ridiculous age. Anyway, the idea is you can do whatever the fuck you're doing, and like at a certain age, you would naturally like the custom would be that you would get it. So yeah, the ones that will be noteworthy are the ones that don't have that have been undergone the gene therapy and bone treatment to survive on larger sizes, which will be very easy to demonstrate on unit sprites. I'll use Skyhand for now, even though I'm not super crazy about the idea, about the name. Go to the Windhenge. Reorganize some stuff. I think I can probably keep the same icon if I remember what it was. Yeah. And then we're going to do the passive, of course. I think I'll just make a new weapon entry for that, actually. We don't really have any good icons for something like this, unfortunately. All right, let's try that and see what we get. We get a forgotten description. Oh yeah, and then we need to actually add the... All right, we'll think about that later, as far as like better icons and naming conventions and stuff, but at least the unit's there. And we wanted to do another unit for the bloodline as well. We wanted to do a unit that could attack area, actually. So I think that would make some sense. And I guess in general, a heavier ranged unit of some sort. Yeah, so besides the interview content that will hopefully get people interested in the content, regardless of like if they're interested in our games specifically. I will also be interested in posting updates to the engine, like features that we've got, probably on a weekly basis, if I had to guess. At the absolute least I would do is monthly, for sure. And these would be not like stream of consciousness with some preparation the way that the channel maps are. They would be specifically edited to show the latest changes and like with some sort of checklist or whatever that says like, here's what we did. And here's what looks good for the future. So yeah, you'd actually be seeing like gameplay or footage or whatever of what's going on in there, and then maybe like showcase of the completed like the tech tree concepts or whatever that had been done that week, or maybe talk about like maps that have been in progress, stuff like that. So it's almost like a little weekly highlight of whatever the dev streams have been like and whatever has gone on behind the scenes outside of that. And then, I mean, we could throw in a bunch of other stuff too. Like something that occurred to me was that maybe we would get. I don't want to do this in the sense that it would be really forced, but if there was some sort of like contribution from somebody who had been like for example, this week, if I was going to do something like this, it would be like, you know, shout out to the Shambler for popping in and giving some good ideas about the Keltar tech progression mechanic, you know, something like that, right? So it'd be like specifically highlighting the contributions of a fan, somebody in the Discord server, somebody in the stream chat, whatever the case may be, who's, you know, contributed, somebody outside of the dev team specifically. And that way it would almost like, it has that sort of cynical artificial effect or whatever. I don't even think it's really artificial, but it's like showing appreciation for somebody, but also sending the signal that like you too could be in this weekly wrap up thing or whatever. You know, stuff like that. And it wouldn't have to be limited to one person necessarily. But if like, you know, you get a couple of people who contributed, you can shout them out and say like, thanks to these people for helping out on the, you know, in this capacity. And we could throw that in there as a little like gesture to the community, if you will, or a public recognition of their impact and their input, their positive input. So I think stuff like that will actually be quite common in the context of those updates, and will be a nice little way to drive community engagement, if you will. In a way where obviously whenever I think of the phrase drive community engagement, I do kind of throw up a little bit in my mouth. But the the concept of doing so in a way where it's actually genuine, the reason why it's so repulsive on its face is because it is usually misused and abused. It's not usually something where you actually feel like there's a reasonable aspect to it. This is a legitimate community, and we're not just doing it in like a context where it's astroturfed the way that most communities for indie games tend to be. So, I mean, I guess most communities for indie games tend to be very small, probably smaller than even ours. But the idea of, the ones that are massively successful, a lot of them tend to be somewhat astroturfed. Which is not to say that there are no legitimate examples of it out there, but it's just that most of the time when you think about it, it's not very positive. So, yeah, I think updates on a weekly basis would be pretty good. Would force me to remain focused, I think, on a week-to-week basis as well, which is pretty nice. I would get like a nice formula going for like a standard issue Vegas project file, record some stuff, slap some stuff on it, you know the whole deal, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. It does feel that way because usually they're aping after their success or something. So. Yeah, not usually stand-up individuals. Well, in the case of Immortal, which is what what are they? Sunspear, I think. Those guys, I assume that's what you're alluding to regarding like LAN play or whatever. I think those guys actually do have investors, which is the sort of make of that what you will, I guess, homie. But yeah. That's sort of its own thing, I suppose. I think they might have raised crowdfunding. The way that this works is that nobody actually has control of the budget. If you gave me something, this is in the realm of video game design. This number is obscenely low, even though to the average person it might sound like a lot. But if you gave me 10 grand, I would just be good for at least like for the better part of a year. If that's that is literally all I need because I just pay my own expenses and work, and that's what I do. Like I just work on the game, and then my expenses are covered based on that. So it's like my life expenses. It's not like a salary. I don't need to pay myself and watch a number go up in my bank account because I'm working on a game. That's for when the game is out and people have recognized how good it is and they buy it. That's what that's for. And even then, it's like, okay, well, I have this money. I will continue paying my bills and continue working because it's what I want to do. Now, I think these guys do want to make games in the sense that they look at it and they think it's a career path that they can do, and that they want to work, they want to earn a living in that sense, or they want to get money. But it doesn't really seem like I don't know how many of these people would continue doing this kind of work if the money wasn't there, if they were just having their expenses covered. I don't know. Maybe that would be enough for a lot of them. So, but yeah, so the way that it works is like you get crowdfunding, you get like, so you start off with your own personal finances usually. It's like, oh, how many afternoons, evenings, and nights do I have to work to get, all of my overtime in and then get the money, all that stuff. So then you figure out that amongst the dev team, like how long can we coast without worrying about stuff, and then you try to build something together. You get a demo, you get something to show people, and that's what goes into the crowdfunding thing. And then in the crowdfunding thing, off the back of that money, you spend all of that irresponsibly, and in the process get something that you can show to investment groups who will then invest into your game in exchange for some element of control or some return on their investment, presumably. And then you spend all of that money and you have to raise more investment later, probably before your game has even come out, because you're probably not doing this very well. And that's how most indie development goes. That's why it's like, I guess maybe not most. By the numbers, you might have more people who don't actually have any budget. I'm not sure. But the notable indie releases, the notable like development firms, like people who actually have like a web page that shows you like, meet our team. And it's like this weird web 2.0 shit that doesn't even work on most browsers. Those people are the ones who have this, like, they have money, they have funding, they have secured certain amounts of things, or at least they want you to think that they have. Maybe they're posing, I don't know. But the idea is that these people actually have way more resources than you or I could even imagine, and they don't actually do anything with it. And I think part of it is because they pay themselves some sort of salary, and part of it is maybe they're allowing themselves to get fucking pranked by other people who are overcharging them or something. I don't know. I don't know what the internal books look like, But if I had to guess, these people aren't doing it very well, just based on the output and based on the purported numbers that I hear thrown around. I mean, StarCraft 2's budget, I'm pretty sure exceeded $100 million for Wings of Liberty. But apparently, maybe this was an estimate for World of Warcraft. Wow, that's pretty good. Oh, I guess it's a paywall, so I can't even look at it. Okay, so that apparently was an erroneous claim. Whatever the case may be, it was probably more than $1 million. And the fact that you even get close to $1 million and the product you get is StarCraft 2 should tell you that something is fucking wrong. That's all I really needed to say. Roller Skates asks, this might be kind of left field, and this was discussed once before. Could I elaborate on how I come up with concepts for unit passives or behaviors? Well, it's a lot easier to design unit concepts when you are working with something. If you're just designing the first stuff, you have to kind of go by the numbers with an archetype. So I think about the defining traits that I've set up for my regencies, which you can see here. And in this case, you see frontal is the first one, which means close range. You see soldiering, which means they've got middling movement speeds. Resilient, which means they've got durable and probably low scale in terms of numbers. They're durable in terms of vitals, and probably low scale in terms of how many units that they actually have. Physical, which is just how their tech is, and manifold, which is the kind of tech they use. Physical is like their playstyle, if you will. So that is the defining trait. So I have something here, even when I'm starting with 0 units and 0 structures, I have some understanding of what I'm working with. So I start with the defining traits. I start with like what regency, what race am I designing units for? Then I get the basic archetypes down. You get the builder, assuming your race has a worker, like structures are built from workers. You get the town center. You get the like maybe utility structure, defensive structure. You get the basic production facilities. The other thing that I do is I figure out what my tech branches are because I usually distinguish between these. And for a lot of them, or maybe for some of them, I guess you could say, it's fairly straightforward. It's infantry vehicles and air units. Wow, that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? But in this case, it's almost a misnomer. So I actually have this written down somewhere, not in Notepad. I should owned. So we look over here, I can scroll down long enough and you can see that I've actually documented what the tech branches are actually going to be. We've got Berserkers in Search of Competition for the Bloodline branch. The Ironclad branch is Titans of Steel with unstoppable firepower. And the Warwing branch is Frontal Cruisers and Fighters that hold no quarter. So I already know the basic qualifications of what a unit would have to be and tick boxes they would have to check in order to fit into one of these branches. And if maybe one of them is a little fuzzy because they tick a couple of boxes for both branches, then the concept probably just needs refining, or I just decide which one it is based on what I think the majority actually is. So you could imagine like the Storm Chief is an artillery walker. Maybe you could make that a bloodline thing, but I'm going to make it an ironclad unit mostly because of role selection and like general composition. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves there. So we know the core idea of each one of these branches. We know the core sort of defining traits of the regency that we're working with. So now it's time to actually get the units down. Now, the easiest one is probably the worker, followed by the town center. In this case, it was a little bit harder because I had to come up with like other behaviors and stuff that are specific to the regency itself and how that regency plays. It's very easy to come up with like a defensive turret. It's very easy to come up with production facilities for each one of the branches. And it's very easy to come up with like maybe some sort of tech progression or something like that in an average regency. Keltar obviously doesn't apply. And as well as like the refinery structure, the structure you build on top of a hyper line in this case. So if you've got Vespene gas or some equivalent in your environment, it's very easy to add a structure there. If not, doesn't apply. Then we get into the part where we're actually dealing with building the unit sort of composition, if you will. I always start with what is the baseline and like the most basic unit that I'm going to make. Usually it's the leftmost branch of the three branches that are actually involving military combatants, you could say. Usually it's that, and usually it's the cheapest one. Usually it's the one that's most susceptible to dying, even if it's not based on vitals. This unit is quite tanky, but it moves quite slow and can be kited as a result. So it's going to be on the front line. It's a melee unit. This is going to encapsulate some thoughts that I have about the Regency themselves. And the cost, the stats, the passive if one exists, the weapons, all of that is going to be indicative of where I think this Regency is going to go, and give me some sort of grounding. And once I have the first unit, I can work on the next in the same line and come up with other units that can sort of be built around it. So now I have something. I know it's a melee unit. Well, what goes well with melee units? Ranged units that can stand behind them and maybe are less tanky and less durable, but the melee units act as the front line. So I came up with the Accomplice, which is a short-range shotgunner, deals mild splash damage, not very much damage at all, in fact, but it's mostly there as a typical sort of unit there in that context. And then I came up with a Banner Hand, which was a unit that was a little bit more emblematic. This is a unit that is a little bit more utilitarian in nature because I've already got my melee, my ranged. What's another thing that I can do? Well, I know this Regency likes short range and melee attacks, so I'm going to make another melee unit, but have it be larger, have it be more expensive so that you're going to build less of it, have it be more durable so that it can last longer, and then give it a little unique passive along with a bit more damage in general. So I came up with the idea that obviously the Keltar have this global passive where all of the units generate shielding as they either harvest resources or attack in general. So they generate the shielding based on the damage that they deal. As a result of that, when the Banner Hand dies, when the Banner Hand generates shields, all nearby Keltar units will gain shields based on what the Banner Hand has generated. And when the Banner Hand dies, shields are then consumed to heal life, if applicable. If the unit's already at full health, no shields are consumed. If they've got 20 shields, but they're only missing 10 health, then only 10 shields are consumed, and so on. So this is basically a way to improve the overall sort of lifespan of your units, of your army, And it's a way to do so in a way that interacts with the existing systems that you already have, while also making sense for why the banner hand is a melee unit on the front lines, is going to be surrounded by other melee and short range units like the accomplice, like the disciple. So I'm building around that core idea of compositions that work together, essentially. It gets a little bit fuzzy afterwards because maybe I'll come up with a concept that doesn't work very well with others. The skin dagger is an example of that. It actually, when it's by itself, it moves much faster. So the idea is that it's like a melee sort of harassment unit that you would actually want to do when no allies are within 4 range. Is actually quite considerable. I might shrink that. Your unit's going to move a lot faster in general. So you get the sort of ramping speed bonus. That's obviously going to result in very different usages of the skin dagger. By itself, it doesn't deal remarkable amounts of damage. It does attack faster than the disciple does, and it deals, it looks like, the same amount of damage with slightly higher armor pen. But it's separate attacks, so it can be reduced by armor more. So most of the time, it'll deal more damage than a disciple, but it's also much more costly, being more magmite and some hypervials, as well as taking longer to actually train. So there's all these elements making the skin dagger less attractive as a general purpose unit to build. You wouldn't want to just replace all disciples with skin daggers, but there's enough overlap there with it being another melee unit that I felt like it probably needs to be in its own sort of class, which is why I moved it down to tier 2, and I'll add some other more niche units that you can train to the second tier as well. So yeah, you basically have to decide, like, what am I actually looking at? Am I coming up with a unit that actually has a place in the tech map? Maybe it comes to pass that the skin dagger actually doesn't really work with the composition around it, in which case I'll have to remove it or significantly overhaul it. But these are all basic ideas. Like when I came up with the units for the Ironclad branch, I actually came up with the Overturn first, and I knew I wanted a heavy-hitting railgun unit, so I made the Overturn. I knew I wanted for the Iron Path this sort of like armored infantry unit that would walk around and have these sort of short range double attack lances, similar to the Overturn in a sense, where it's a railgun, but have like 2 of them on either side. So that would be an interesting aspect to what these guys do. And they move somewhat slow. They move actually slightly faster than the infantry do, but they still are slow in an absolute sense. And the idea is that you'll be able to use them as like heavier hitting units that can attack ground and air. And then the Storm Chief was the unit that I came up with afterwards, which was an artillery walker. You could imagine it's somewhat similar to the Paladin. Doesn't fire quite as many missiles, and is also just in general a bit more durable, and also I think more expensive in terms of magmite, but less expensive in terms of hypervials if you were translating the StarCraft resources, obviously. But this unit is very much meant to be an artillery walker, which is why it has 9 range. It's the highest range unit in the entire game for the Keltar so far. Healing melee units with their projectiles as they attack. I see. So something that like they're basically they pierce or leave behind a trail, as you're saying, in some capacity, and that changes what the result is. That's kind of interesting. I'm not 100% sure if that fits the Keltar. It actually sounds a bit more like something that would fit the Orlithray, with like a slime trail of some sort or something. But I could see a world where maybe it something could charge up shields maybe for the Keltar. It could be like some sort of projectile that moves somewhat slowly, but high cooldown attack, pretty decent amount of single target damage, and units in the, or maybe it could be AoE and the units in the blast zone get their shields regenerated, allies in the blast zone get their shields boosted or something, as well as maybe it is something like leaving a trail or whatever. The trail thing I think specifically works best for like a slime ball from the Orlithray probably, or some other biotic like organic thing. But I could see it being like some sort of whack missile trail that's been specifically engineered. That might be a Sycoran thing. They interact with projectiles a lot. So maybe that could be a Sycoran idea. Oh yeah, well, I guess Lowish Gates was thinking in the same thing. This is projectile that restores shields life. To all 4 allies that are caught in its trail. Something like that. And then we had the idea for Keltar There's another projectile that heals, restores shields in AoE. Something like that would make sense. Yeah, cool. Yeah, the Psychora are going to have like fields that impact or interact with projectiles specifically. So you can imagine it would be like a 2D plane of some sort that when projectiles pass through, their speed would be altered. I think for a lot of it was like make the projectile move slower, but give it like bonus armor pen or something. And so you could imagine like especially wanting to deploy this against buildings or other slow targets. But your projectiles move pretty fast as Keltar, so for the most part you would actually be able to use this even against other units because the trade-offs are still beneficial. So stuff like that is going to be pretty common for Psychora to interact with projectiles by having fields that the projectiles actually collide with and pass through, and then get some sort of bonus, which will be pretty neat. Something that you don't really see in RTS. Anyway, we're trying to go back to this u_.yml file, which also has u here because it's untracked, I guess, or unadded or something. Something goofy. Probably a word that doesn't work very well with itself. TBH. Yeah, projectiles applying certain things that to then be interacted with other things are definitely interesting. I mean, with debuffs and buffs being more common in general, you could imagine a situation where like you could have a unit that's very buffed and then an enemy unit that has some sort of passive where like every hit they land on that unit consumes one of the buffs and like deals extra damage or something. So you could specifically use these units to, counter certain hostiles. I'm not sure. Did you are you aware of the Embraceet unit, the perch pistol? Has a pretty nice uh, couple of passives. There's so it can attach to any unit with a free turret slot, and they fire these disruption rounds, which slow the movement speed by 5% per stack. And when they're attached to an ally, the passive also applies to their allies' attacks. Now, I specifically designed this unit to be most beneficial with like fast attacking units, right? Well, this unit has a cooldown of 0.2. So, and can attack while moving. So this is a case where there would be a natural synergy where you'd want to slap a perch pistol on the Talon key and then see what happens. Stuff like that I'm going to play around with a lot. And obviously because projectiles don't track their targets unless it's a specific behavior in Cosmonic Retail. I guess I probably didn't even note that anywhere, did I? I guess I could use that. I could add that note in weapons. I guess it does say should they strike an enemy. So I should probably elaborate here and specify that the tracking is not a consistent aspect. But yeah, the tracking, projectile tracking, is very uncommon, and so slowing down projectiles actually has a pretty massive impact. Nah, dude, you gotta eat. I gotta eat pretty soon, actually. Wait, what the fuck? What fucking unit only has one weight? I guess the accomplice. That's nuts. There was something for the Ansifi. Aha. That's what it is. I guess I should give him a unit with an actual rifle. See ya, homie. I might drop the armor pen down to 3 because of the fact that you can enhance armor pen. That could be pretty interesting, actually. Yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll bump its base damage up a bit. Pretty good shit, I think. This is definitely starting to look more active already. I obviously had ideas for movement speed and attack speed enhancing trophy rooms. Not 100% sure how those will go. or what tier they would be at. I imagine movement speed would actually be a higher tier than attack speed, I think. So that would probably be like 4 and 5. It sounds like something that could work for Ember Seat, maybe. I've got a bunch of interesting names for them, like Comedian. The Comedian's going to be a pretty fun unit to use, though. Like, I can already imagine what its ridiculous... yes, Witness. What its unit responses will be like. I agree, DMAC. Very useful names. I named this unit after my dog, so there you go. Talk about favoritism. Jesus, get this Pronogo guy out of here. I think I actually will be getting out of here because I have to get some water and then take a walk after I fold my laundry. So many responsibilities, so little time. But yeah, I guess I'll write down Deadeye since you mentioned it. I did use Dreadeye, but it wasn't written EYE. It was AYE because it was a pirate unit, and it was for a comedy project. Dreadeye. Should have been Dread U, obviously. That's the obvious joke. So I guess we'll be signing off here. We do indeed have a good amount of exciting things, exciting developments. Obviously, I think the biggest, most interesting aspect is probably the fact that if we go to the atrium, we can see this. The trophy room's passive, or I guess we can go to the arena, so we don't have to scroll. That's pretty cool. The fact that we got some new units is pretty cool, even though we only added the Skyhand and the Skull Sight. I guess we added, obviously we added the rooms here, right? The stone room, the armory, the gravestone. So eventually I'll go through and update some of these names and stuff to make them a little bit less boring, but good shit in my opinion. You can check us out here on the website. You can check us out on the Discord server in the description of this video. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. Bye-bye, homies.